She walked the streets carrying a heavy bag filled with homemade sweets. The sun burned, her feet ached, and her heart felt even heavier. Every door that closed, every indifferent glance, only deepened the feeling that she was invisible. Yet what no one knew was that behind that woman selling sweets lived a dreamer's soul, quietly asking for just one chance to change her story. Maybe you've felt that too, carrying a weight that isn't only physical, but emotional. The weight of a life that seems stuck, refusing to move forward. And that's why her story connects with you. Because it proves that even from the lowest place, you can create a brand new reality. Her mornings did not carry the lightness of a fresh start. They carried the heaviness of another battle on repeat. The alarm rang early, and her first thought was always the same: will I sell enough today to pay the bills? Uncertainty became her routine, eating away at every fragment of hope. Money was counted with almost painful precision. A few coins in her pocket, just enough to buy basic ingredients, never enough for even the smallest luxury. While others chose what to eat, she only prayed that what little she had at home would last until the week's end. When she stepped into the streets with her sweets, the challenge wasn't just to sell. The real challenge was to face the looks. Some turned away quickly, as if ignoring her was easier. Others cast glances of pity, as if silently saying, "Poor thing." And then there were those who simply pretended she wasn't there. Every no wasn't just the refusal of a piece of cake or a chocolate truffle. It felt like life itself was rejecting her. There were days she came home having sold almost nothing, and the shame weighed just as much as the exhaustion in her body. Her chest tightened every time she thought about the rent. The landlord had already warned her, no more delays. She knew that if she failed, she risked losing the little she had, that simple roof that still felt like her only refuge. And in the middle of all those emotions, fear showed up. Fear of not having food for tomorrow. Fear of not being able to take care of herself. Fear that this cycle would never end. It's the kind of fear that paralyzes, drains your strength, and makes life feel like a tunnel with no exit. Maybe you felt something like this. You've worked hard, given your best, and still the world seemed blind to your effort. Maybe you've wanted to cry out for help, but instead you swallowed your tears and kept walking, because deep down, there was no other choice. If this part of the story touched your heart, write the word faith in the comments. That word represents the thread that holds you together when everything else feels like it's falling apart. Type it as an act of courage, a silent cry saying, "I still believe." And take a moment to subscribe, because here you'll find more stories like this, stories that remind us that pain can always be transformed into victory. Share this video with someone you love. Who knows? This message might be the spark that reignites hope in their heart. Because deep down, this story isn't only about a woman who sold sweets. It's about me, about you, about anyone who has ever stood on the edge of giving up. It's about the seed of transformation that can still be planted even in the middle of the desert. Sadness became a constant visitor in her life, the kind that doesn't ask permission to come in, but settles in every corner of the soul. She walked the streets with her bag of sweets, but inside she carried a weight far heavier than anything she held in her hands. Her heart felt like it was always on the verge of collapse. There were days she stood in front of store windows, wondering why she couldn't be on the other side, choosing new clothes or buying a simple gift for someone she loved. Instead, she was always outside looking in, as if happiness were a place reserved for others. When she saw childhood friends posting pictures from trips or celebrating professional success, silent tears would fall. Not out of envy, but from the ache of feeling forgotten, as if life itself had skipped writing her happy chapters. That emptiness hurt more than hunger ever could. Sadness wasn't only in the big moments. It lived in the small ones too. In the tired gaze staring back at her from the mirror, not recognizing the dreamer she once was. In the loneliness of eating lunch alone, finishing leftovers, without any hope for change. She asked herself, will my whole life be like this? Was I born only to survive and not to live? The questions echoed with no reply, and every silence felt heavier than any spoken word. And maybe you felt that too, that sadness that seems to take up every corner of your soul, making it impossible to see any light in the darkness. Have you ever smiled at others while secretly falling apart inside? That was exactly how she felt. A forced smile to keep others from worrying, while inside she carried a storm of endless tears. Her loneliness ran so deep that even when surrounded by people, she felt completely alone. Sometimes the sadness turned into physical pain. Her chest tightened, her breath grew short, and she wondered if her body could endure this silent battle. Still, she rose every single day, because giving up felt even scarier. So let me pause here and ask you, have you ever felt this way too? Have you ever carried a sadness so heavy you couldn't even find words to explain it? If so, know this, you are not alone. Her story is also a reflection of so many stories, including yours. And even in that gray landscape, a hidden spark remained, a thin thread of hope she herself could not yet see. Her sadness was deep, but it was not the end. The story of her life still had pages left to be written, and the universe was already preparing a turning point that would change everything. Fear was like a constant shadow, following her with every step. It didn't appear suddenly, it was always there, silent, ready to remind her that everything could collapse at any moment. It was the fear of not being able to pay for the basics, of not having food to eat, of watching her life fall apart right before her eyes. At the end of the day, when she counted the coins, her heart would race. Will this cover the rent? And what if I don't sell anything tomorrow? The questions echoed inside her mind, each one carrying the weight of an entire world. Her fear wasn't only about today, but also about tomorrow, a tomorrow that always seemed uncertain and threatening. There were nights when she could barely sleep. Her body was tired, but her mind refused to stop. Thoughts spun like rusty gears, replaying the same scenes of failure and loss. And when sleep finally came, it was shallow, fragile, filled with dreams that felt more like nightmares. Fear even had a scent. The faint smell of gas about to run out, of food that had to be rationed, of crumpled bills stuffed into a drawer because there wasn't enough money to pay them. That smell mixed with anxiety and created a suffocating atmosphere, as if the very air were too heavy to breathe. Sometimes, while walking the streets offering her sweets, her legs trembled. It wasn't only physical exhaustion, it was fear running through her body, a constant warning that failure was always lurking nearby. It felt as though she could collapse right there in front of strangers who wouldn't even notice her fall. But her greatest fear wasn't losing the little she had. It was losing herself. A quiet terror that life would never change, that days would keep repeating one after another until she grew old without ever touching the dreams she had carried in silence. And you, have you ever felt this too? That paralyzing fear that keeps you from moving forward, that robs your hope, that makes it seem like your whole life is trapped in a dead end? Maybe you've also woken up in the middle of the night, heart racing, not knowing how you'll face the next day. That was how she lived. Fear wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was a constant presence. An unwanted companion that slipped into every decision, every sigh, every glance toward the future. It was always one step behind her, as if she were running from something invisible that never stopped chasing. And yet, despite the fear, she kept going. Because giving up, as tempting as it sometimes seemed, was even scarier. She knew that if she stopped, if she let fear win, everything would end right there. And deep inside, hidden but alive, there was a small voice whispering, "This is not the end." That fragile thread of courage was what kept her standing, even when fear tried to swallow everything around her. She didn't know it yet, but that same voice would one day become the key to seeing beyond the darkness, the key to discovering that a different path was already waiting for her. Among all the pains she carried, perhaps the cruelest was the feeling of invisibility. It was as if she existed, yet no one truly saw her. She walked the streets offering her sweets, and many times people turned their eyes away before she even opened her mouth. That small gesture felt like a silent punch, reinforcing the idea that her life had no meaning to anyone. There were days when she crossed entire avenues with the bag in her hands, feeling as though she could disappear right there, and nobody would notice. Cars rushed by, people hurried along their paths, and she was left with the bitter sense of being nothing more than a shadow in the crowd. When she stepped into a shop to try selling her sweets, she was often ignored before she could even finish her sentence. It was as if her presence was bothersome, as if she held no value at all. She would return home with a heavy heart, carrying not just the bag, but the weight of rejection. And it wasn't only in the streets. At home, loneliness also claimed its space. There was no one to ask how her day had been, no one to listen to her fears or her hopes. The silence of the walls echoed the same message the world outside repeated, "You don't matter." That sense of invisibility ate her from the inside. She remembered being a child, dreaming of being recognized, of showing her talents to the world. But now, as an adult, she felt irrelevant, as if destiny had stripped away every possibility of being seen. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she couldn't even recognize herself. The tired face, the dull eyes, the messy hair, everything reflected the hard life she lived. She wondered if anyone, anywhere, could still see beauty in her. And the answer always seemed to be no. And you, have you ever felt that way? As if no one notices you, as if your efforts are unseen, as if the world keeps moving forward as though you don't exist? That feeling can be devastating, because it doesn't only steal your hope, it steals your very identity. That was the burden she carried every day. It wasn't only about money, it wasn't only about fear of the future. It was the constant sense that her life had no witnesses, that everything she did vanished without leaving a trace. Still, deep within her heart, a small spark remained. A quiet longing to be seen, to be recognized, to be valued. That spark, though fragile, would become the starting point of a change that was about to unfold. Because sometimes, it is in the depths of invisibility that the strength to seek something greater is born. And she was about to discover that the universe has a surprising way of responding to hearts that refuse to give up. It was late afternoon, and her body was exhausted after yet another day of selling with almost no results. She stepped onto the bus with her bag still nearly full, sat by the window, and let her gaze wander into the movement of the street. Her mind was still drowning in the weight of failure, but something different was about to happen. Behind her, two young women chatted excitedly. At first, she didn't pay attention, but then a few words caught her ear. One of them said, "Can you believe it? Ever since I started practicing this thing called the law of attraction, my life has completely changed." The other answered with the same excitement, "Me too. It's amazing how, when we shift our thoughts, things start to happen. I write every single day in my notebook as if I already had the life of my dreams, and it feels like the universe actually listens." She stayed quiet, pretending not to hear, but each word pierced through like a light breaking into the darkness. Law of attraction. That phrase echoed in her mind. She had never heard of it before, but something inside told her there was a hidden key in those words. As the bus rolled on, the conversation continued. One of the girls shared how she landed a new job after weeks of speaking positive affirmations. The other described how visualizing the life she wanted made her feel stronger, more alive. The woman selling sweets didn't fully understand what it all meant, but inside, something was awakening. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of curiosity, almost like a disguised form of hope. Could it really be possible to change your life just with thoughts? She asked herself in silence. When she stepped off the bus, her heart was racing. Not from fear. Not from sadness. But from a strange new feeling, a quiet sense of expectation. She wanted to know more. She needed to discover what this law of attraction really was. At home, after a quick shower, she grabbed her simple cell phone and began searching. She found videos, articles, and phrases that seemed to speak directly to her. You attract what you believe. The mind is a magnet that shapes your reality. Every word she read, every video she watched felt like the universe was finally answering her silent prayers. She began to realize she might not be condemned to a life of pain. Maybe there was a way out. A way to rewrite her own story. The fear and sadness were still there, but something new was rising within her, a glimpse of hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that life could be different. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but deep inside she felt she had found a clue, a map leading her out of the darkness. It was only the beginning, but within her blossomed the certainty that the universe had heard her cry, and that, somehow, it was showing her the way. That very night, after diving into videos and texts about the law of attraction, she felt a mix of fear and excitement. She didn't know if it would really work, but she decided to try. She pulled out an old notebook she once used for writing down expenses, and on the first page she wrote, "I deserve to prosper." At first, the words felt strange. Her pencil trembled in her hand, as if she were writing something forbidden. But the more she repeated the phrase, the more a different kind of strength began to rise within her. It wasn't just a note anymore, it was a declaration of life. The next morning, before leaving the house, she opened the notebook again. This time she wrote, "My life is changing for the better." She whispered it several times, almost as if trying to convince not only herself, but also the universe. As she walked the streets selling sweets, she whispered simple phrases she had learned, "I am abundance. I am capable. I attract good things into my life." With every repetition, something inside her shifted, even if the outside world still looked the same. Deep down, a part of her was still skeptical. At times she even laughed quietly to herself, "Can a thought really change my reality?" But strangely, the more she practiced, the lighter she felt. It was as if the words were creating a hidden space of hope inside her. The affirmations became a small ritual. Before bed, she would write 3 sentences she truly wanted to believe. At first it was hard, because her mind kept reminding her of the debts, the struggles, the rejections. But little by little, she began to notice that her words carried power. One night, after writing, "I deserve a better life," several times, she cried. But it wasn't a cry of sadness, it was a cry of release. For the first time, it felt like she was giving herself permission to believe she deserved more than pain. And you, have you ever declared something that seemed impossible, but it awakened an unexpected strength inside you? Have you felt how, when you speak words of faith, your soul begins to rise? She still didn't have all the answers, but she knew she had started something that could change everything. It was like planting a seed in dry soil. There were no fruits yet, but for the first time, a root of hope was breaking through. That was the beginning of her journey with affirmations. Simple, quiet, but powerful enough to open her heart to a new reality. After a few days of writing and repeating affirmations, she realized that something inside her was shifting. It was still too soon to see results in the physical world, but her mind was no longer the same. That's when she remembered one of the phrases she had overheard on the bus: "I close my eyes and imagine myself living the life I want." Those words echoed in her until one night she decided to try. She sat on the edge of her bed, closed her eyes, and began to imagine. Instead of the small, cramped house she lived in, she pictured a bright and joyful space, filled with color. She saw a well-organized kitchen, where she prepared her sweets calmly, with plenty of ingredients. She smelled the chocolate, heard the pans clinking, and saw herself smiling as she worked. In her imagination, she also saw herself serving customers who walked in with happy faces. She saw children asking for chocolate truffles, adults praising the taste, and even neighbors recommending the shop to others. The vision was so vivid her heart began to race. At first, it felt like nothing more than a distant dream. But the more she practiced, the stronger the visualization became. The more details she added, the more real it felt. She could sense the fabric of the apron, the heat of the oven, even the sound of the cash register closing after a sale. There were nights when she cried with her eyes still closed, not because she already had all of it, but because, in some way, she could already feel what it was like to live that reality. And that was what gave her strength. During the day, as she walked the streets with her bag of sweets, she carried those images with her. While facing indifferent glances, she remembered the little shop filled with customers. When she heard a "no," she imagined people praising her products. That practice turned pain into fuel for belief. And have you ever caught yourself daydreaming, creating a future so vivid it almost felt real? Have you ever felt that even in the middle of difficulties, your mind could become a refuge of hope? With each new visualization, she grew more confident. It was as if she were building a parallel reality inside herself, one so strong it began to shape even her gestures and expressions. The eyes that once reflected only exhaustion now carried a different glow. Maybe others didn't notice, but inside her, a silent revolution was already underway. That simple act of visualizing opened a new dimension in her life. It wasn't just about imagining, it was about believing, feeling, living in advance the future she was ready to receive. After a few weeks of affirmations and visualizations, she realized she needed something more concrete, something to give form to what she was creating in her mind. That's when she decided to transform that old notebook, once used only for keeping track of bills, into her manifestation journal. It was no longer a place of debts and scarcity, but the soil where she would plant her new dreams. On the very first page, she wrote in big letters, "The life I deserve begins here." That phrase alone sent a wave of emotion through her. She felt as if she were breaking away from the past, leaving behind the identity of someone invisible and stepping into the role of a woman co-creating her own future. Every morning, as soon as she woke up, she wrote as if she were already living the life she desired. She didn't write in the future tense, but in the present, "I have my candy shop full of customers. I am recognized for my work and live in abundance. My life is prosperous and joyful." The more she wrote, the more she believed she was simply recording a reality that already belonged to her. There were moments when she grew emotional rereading what she had written. She didn't have the shop yet, but when she read those words, it felt as if she were already there, as if she could touch the walls, hear the chatter of customers, and feel the joy of being fulfilled. Over time, writing became a sacred ritual. She never skipped a day, not even the hardest ones. In fact, it was on those very days that her journal became a refuge, reminding her that life was not defined by temporary pain. She also began to give thanks for things she didn't yet have. She wrote sentences like, "I am grateful for the success of my business. I am grateful for every customer who finds their way to me. I am grateful for the abundant life I am living." This act of advanced gratitude made her feel rich on the inside, even when her pockets were still empty. And you, have you ever tried writing your dreams as if they were already real? Have you ever put on paper what you long to live, not as a request, but as a certainty? This simple practice can open doors in the mind and create a new vision for the future. Her manifestation journal became a symbol of faith. It wasn't just paper and ink, it was a map of possibilities, a physical proof that she was building a new narrative for her life. With every page she filled, with every phrase she wrote, she felt closer to something greater. It was as if, by writing, she was signing a silent contract with the universe. That simple habit became the bridge between her dreams and her reality. Because deep down, she was no longer just dreaming, she was preparing to live the life she wrote about every single day. The days were still challenging, but something subtle began to happen. It felt as though invisible answers were starting to arrive, signs she might have ignored before. Now, with her heart more awake, every little detail seemed to carry a special meaning. One of the first signs came in the form of words. While walking down the street, she overheard someone say, "Believe it, your life can change in an instant." The phrase wasn't directed at her, but it entered her ears like a private message. She smiled quietly, feeling as if the universe itself was whispering to her heart. Days later, a neighbor who rarely spoke to her stopped to compliment her sweets. She said they were different, that they had a special taste, and suggested she should sell them in more places. It was just a simple comment, but inside her it reignited a flame of encouragement that had been extinguished for a long time. Another day, on her way home, she found a coin on the ground. To others it might have been nothing but coincidence, but to her it was a clear reminder: abundance exists, and it can appear in unexpected ways. She kept that coin as a charm, a symbol that greater things were on their way. She also began to notice changes within herself. Mornings no longer felt as heavy. With every phrase she wrote in her journal, with every visualization, she felt a different kind of relief, as if she were changing the very clothing of her soul. Even her way of walking had shifted. She no longer kept her head down, but lifted her face, like someone who believes something good can happen at any moment. Her customers, though still few, began treating her differently. One older man, after buying a sweet, told her, "You have talent. Never give up." Those words echoed in her mind for days. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a seal of confirmation that what she was planting in thought was beginning to sprout in the real world. In moments like these, she realized she wasn't alone. Somehow, even in silence, the universe was responding to the seeds she planted every day in her manifestation journal. It was as if every written word was an invisible prayer, and every sign she received was the answer. And though the struggles hadn't disappeared, she no longer saw them in the same way. Because in the middle of the pain, there were now signs of hope. And that hope, even small, carried enough strength to hold her up and keep her firm on her new path. It was only the beginning, but deep inside she already knew, something extraordinary was in motion. As the days went by, the signs became more and more evident. A loyal customer started showing up every morning, always buying more than he needed and praising her sweets. One lady told her with conviction, "You're going to have your own shop one day, believe it." Those words felt like little gifts, reinforcing her growing certainty that something was moving in her favor. It was during this season that she truly began to understand what the law of attraction meant. Watching more videos and reading small articles on her phone, she realized it wasn't about magic or coincidence. It was a natural law, one that said thoughts work like magnets. Whatever you focus on with emotion and consistency begins to multiply in your life. The idea seemed almost too simple to be real, yet the more she reflected, the more sense it made. Back when she spent her days complaining, she attracted circumstances that only confirmed scarcity. Now that she had shifted her focus to gratitude and possibility, it was as if the world itself was responding with opportunities, even if they were small. She understood that the mind holds a quiet power to create reality. Every phrase written in her journal, every visualization, every repeated affirmation wasn't just a mental exercise. It was energy being sent out into the universe, slowly shaping the circumstances around her. These discoveries filled her with excitement. She didn't need grand evidence, the little things were enough: an unexpected compliment, a new order, even the simple fact of waking up with more joy was already proof that something was changing. And you, have you noticed how your thoughts influence what happens around you? Have you ever felt that when you truly believe in something, doors begin to open? That realization can be life-changing, because it shows us we are not just victims of life, but co-creators of it. Every sign she received was now seen as confirmation. Her life wasn't fully transformed yet, but she was no longer the same. The heart that once carried only heaviness now held a new confidence, almost impossible to explain. As she grew in her understanding of the law of attraction, she began to feel more in control of her own journey. Fear still appeared, but it no longer dominated. In its place, a steady faith was taking root, built little by little. It felt as though the universe was testing her persistence, sending small clues that she was on the right path. And every time she recognized a sign, she felt within her a certainty that complete transformation was on the way. Weeks passed, and the small signs began to grow into something greater. Until then, it had only been words of encouragement, different glances, and occasional orders. But that day, something happened that would shift the entire course of her journey. She was standing at the door of a bakery, offering her sweets, just as she had done so many mornings before. The owner, who had bought from her a few times, called her over to talk. Her heart raced, afraid she was about to hear, "Don't come back here again." But the surprise that followed was nothing like what she expected. With a genuine smile, he said, "Your sweets are really good. I've been thinking, would you like to supply my bakery? That way, I can put them on the counter, and you'll sell more without having to walk around so much." For a moment, she fell silent. It was as if time had stopped. Had she heard correctly? Supplying the bakery? That meant selling every day, to many customers, without knocking on door after door. Her heart filled with gratitude. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. She remembered the phrases she had written in her notebook, the visualizations before sleep, the affirmations whispered on the streets. Everything seemed to be aligning in that very moment. She accepted the offer with tears in her eyes. The owner smiled and said, "Then it's settled. Bring me a batch tomorrow. We'll start small and see how it goes." She left that place without feeling the ground beneath her feet, her soul light, as if she were flying. That night, when she opened her notebook, she wrote in big letters, "The universe is responding." And for the first time, she felt she wasn't just dreaming, she was harvesting the first fruits of her new reality. That moment was more than a business invitation. It was the confirmation that when the mind shifts, the world shifts with it. It was living proof that the law of attraction was at work, aligning circumstances that once seemed impossible. Though she knew there was still a long journey ahead, that first opportunity was the spark that ignited an unshakable confidence. And from that day on, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, she prepared the batch more carefully than ever before. The sweet aroma filled her simple home, but this time, it carried with it the fragrance of hope. She arrived early at the bakery with the boxes in her hands, and when she saw her sweets displayed on the counter, her heart nearly burst with joy. Throughout the morning, she watched quietly from the side. One customer bought a truffle and came back minutes later to order 5 more. Another tried a slice of cake and said out loud, "This is amazing. Who made it?" The clerk pointed to her, and for the first time, she was seen not as a street vendor, but as a skilled baker. The orders grew faster than she expected. At the end of the day, the bakery owner called her over and said, "You have a future. Make more for tomorrow, because this is going to sell." His words echoed like music, feeding a confidence she had never felt before. At home, when she wrote in her notebook, she realized she no longer had to force herself to believe. Now there was real evidence that what she visualized and affirmed was becoming reality. The notebook was no longer just an exercise of faith, it had become almost a record of victories. Day by day, she felt more motivated to continue her practice. She didn't just write and visualize anymore, now she smiled more, gave thanks more, and even the way she walked through the streets had changed. People began to notice. Some even commented, "You look different, more confident." And she smiled, keeping the secret of her transformation quietly in her heart. This new energy began attracting even more opportunities. A neighbor asked her to make sweets for a small party. Later, a teacher from the local school ordered chocolate truffles for an event. It felt as if the doors that had once been closed were now opening, one by one. And you, have you ever felt that shift when something finally starts working out? That moment when signs turn into real results, and life itself confirms you're on the right path. It's a unique feeling, powerful enough to heal even the deepest scars. Every order she delivered was more than money. It was the validation of a new chapter. It was proof that she was no longer invisible, that she carried a gift, and the world was ready to recognize it. She then understood that the true power of the law of attraction wasn't only about changing thoughts, but about transforming who you are on the inside. And when that happens, the world inevitably responds. As her orders grew, her routine began to change. Before, she spent her days walking the streets with a bag in her hands. Now, most of her time was in the kitchen, preparing bigger and bigger batches. The days were still tiring, but there was a difference, her effort was now filled with purpose. Money started coming in more steadily. It wasn't full abundance yet, but there was relief. She managed to pay rent on time, settle a few overdue bills, and even buy new utensils to improve her production. Every small victory felt like a miracle, a confirmation that she was moving in the right direction. It was during this time that she began to dream bigger. If she could sell this much just by supplying the bakery and taking informal orders, why not have a space of her own? The idea of a small shop began to grow in her mind, not as a distant fantasy, but as a real possibility. At night, when she opened her manifestation journal, she added new phrases, "My store is full of customers. I am the owner of my own business. I live from what I love to do." Writing those words no longer felt strange, it felt like a preview of the future drawing closer. She started saving part of her earnings, even if it was just a little. Each coin she put aside became a symbol that she was investing in herself. She saved carefully, like someone planting seeds in silence, knowing that one day the harvest would come. One day, while walking down a nearby street, she noticed a small commercial space for rent. The sign was plain, almost unnoticeable, yet to her, it seemed to shine. She leaned against the empty storefront and, for a few seconds, imagined her name written there, "Sweets of Hope." Her heart raced. She didn't yet have enough to rent the place, but that vision became engraved in her mind. In every visualization, she began to include that little shop, with colorful walls, displays full of sweets, and smiling customers. And as if the universe had heard her, shortly after, she received unexpected help. A longtime customer, touched by her dedication, offered to place a large advance order for a wedding. The payment would be enough for her to take the very first step toward her dream. Through both tears and laughter, she realized, what once seemed impossible was now within reach. It wasn't just about selling sweets. It was about reclaiming dignity, finding purpose, and embracing the right to believe in herself. Her business was still under construction, but inside her, it was already real. And that certainty became the strength that pushed her forward each day. The day she opened the doors of her own little shop was one of the most memorable days of her life. The space was simple, small, yet to her, it felt like a palace. The walls were painted in bright, joyful colors. A handmade sign carried the name Sweets of Hope. Every detail reflected the care of someone who had been waiting for that moment for years. On that first day, she had no idea how many customers would come. Nervously, she arranged and rearranged the display case countless times. But soon, the first people walked in, drawn by the irresistible aroma that filled the street. Her smile as she greeted each one was a blend of gratitude and fulfillment. Sales were good, and the following days were even better. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. There was a new bakery where every sweet carried both flavor and love. Orders grew in number, and for the first time, she had to admit she couldn't handle it all alone. That's when she hired her first helper, a young neighbor, full of energy, who looked at her with admiration. This decision was more than just practical, it was proof that her dream was now creating opportunities for others too. The business thrived so much that, within a few months, she was able to invest in new equipment. She bought a larger oven, modern utensils, and even a more elegant display case to showcase her creations. Each purchase was a tangible symbol of the transformation the law of attraction had helped her set in motion. At times, when she paused to catch her breath amid the busyness of the shop, she remembered the days when she returned home with a full bag and an empty heart. Now she was living a reality that once existed only in her nightly visualizations. And the most surprising part was that people didn't come only for the sweets. Many came for the story. They wanted to meet the woman who had started on the streets and was now the proud owner of her own business. She had become a quiet inspiration, a living example that faith, action, and perseverance can rewrite any destiny. This new chapter also gave her the chance to support her family. She could provide more comfort, pay bills without fear, and even plan small luxuries that once felt unreachable. Simple things, buying new clothes, going on an outing, became victories celebrated with tears of joy. Every day brought new confirmation. The universe never fails when someone chooses to believe and act in harmony with their dreams. And she was only beginning to expand. One night, after everyone had left, she stayed alone in the shop. The lights were half turned off, and silence filled the space. She sat in one of the chairs, looked around, and let the tears flow freely. But this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of triumph. She looked at the painted walls, the neatly arranged utensils, the display case filled with sweets she had created with her own hands. This wasn't just a shop. It was the materialization of years of struggle, pain, and persistence. It was living proof that her dreams hadn't died, they had only been waiting for the right moment to bloom. She remembered the times she felt invisible, ignored on the streets. She remembered the paralyzing fear that almost made her give up, the nights of silent tears, the emptiness that felt endless. And now, all of that had been transformed into fuel to treasure the present even more. She realized that victory wasn't just about money or sales. The true victory was reclaiming her identity. She was no longer the woman who believed she was too small for the world. Now she saw herself as someone capable of creating, prospering, and inspiring. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream beyond survival. She thought about taking pastry courses, expanding the shop, bringing her sweets to other neighborhoods, and maybe even other cities. Dreams that once seemed unreachable now appeared as real possibilities. Every customer who walked into her store was more than just a sale. They were a reminder that she was on the right path. A confirmation that the universe had answered her call, aligning circumstances and people so her life could be transformed. She knew not every day would be easy. There would still be challenges, bills to pay, tough decisions to make. But now there was a difference. She was prepared, stronger, more confident. She no longer walked in the dark, because within her there was enough light to illuminate any obstacle. That night, in her manifestation journal, she wrote, "I am living proof that pain can be transformed into victory." She closed the notebook gently, took a deep breath, and smiled. Because deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of an even greater journey. Personal fulfillment wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new phase, one where dreams could be as big as her faith allowed them to be. The success of her little shop didn't take long to reach beyond the neighborhood. One day, a reporter from the local newspaper passed by, caught by the irresistible smell of sweets, and decided to step inside. He spoke with her, listened to her story, and the very next day her journey filled an entire page with the headline, "From Street Vendor to Business Owner, the Sweet Transformation of Hope." The article spread quickly. New customers began to appear, not just for the quality of the sweets, but to meet the woman who had turned tears into triumphs. Many said they were moved by her story and left the shop carrying not only sweets, but also inspiration. Shortly after, she received an unexpected invitation. A local school wanted her to share her story with the students. At first, she hesitated. She had always seen herself as ordinary, not as someone who could stand before a crowd. But remembering everything she had overcome, she decided to say yes. On the day of the talk, she walked into the auditorium with her heart racing. As she looked at the children and teenagers watching her with anticipation, a wave of nervousness washed over her. But when she began to speak, the words flowed naturally. She shared about the hard days, about the bus ride where she first heard of the law of attraction, about her manifestation journal, and about the courage to believe. As she spoke, she noticed tears in the eyes of some of the students. At the end, many came to hug her, saying they too had dreams but often felt too small to pursue them. She smiled and replied, "If I could do it, you can too." That moment marked a turning point. She was no longer just the owner of a shop. She had become a messenger of hope, someone whose life inspired others not to give up on themselves. And you, have you ever imagined that your pain could one day become someone else's inspiration? Have you ever thought that, by overcoming your battles, you could become the light for another person's path? She returned home with a light heart, realizing that her story's purpose went far beyond sweets. It was about showing that everyone carries within themselves the power to co-create a new reality. After the school talk, the impact was even greater than she had imagined. Teachers shared short clips of the moment on social media, and within hours, many people were commenting on her story. What had begun as a simple newspaper article was now becoming a wave of inspiration. Soon, another invitation arrived, this time from a community association that held motivational gatherings for vulnerable youth. She accepted without hesitation, believing she could pass on to them the same spark of hope that had transformed her own life. At the event, she spoke with more confidence. Each word carried not theory, but lived experience. She talked about the pain of feeling invisible, about the fear that nearly paralyzed her, but also about the decision to believe in something greater. And the attentive eyes in the audience showed her message was resonating deeply in their hearts. With time, invitations multiplied. Churches, nonprofits, even small businesses began asking her to share her story. She, who once believed she had no voice, was now being heard with respect and admiration. It was moving to realize that people weren't just looking to learn how to sell or start a business. They were searching for strength, for faith, for living proof that it is possible to transform your reality. And that's exactly what they found in her presence. Every new opportunity was also a lesson. She discovered that sharing her journey not only inspired others, but also strengthened her own heart. Each time she told her story, she remembered where she had come from and everything she had conquered. Her life was no longer only about sweets. The sweets had been the starting point, but her true mission was revealing itself, to be a beacon of hope for those still walking through darkness. And as her voice spread, she realized the universe continued opening doors. Doors she never would have dared to dream of before. Time passed, and the little shop that once felt like a distant dream was no longer enough to serve so many customers. Business was so strong that often the display case was empty long before the afternoon ended. It was the clearest sign, it was time to grow even more. With courage and discipline, she decided to expand. She rented a larger space on a busy street and transformed it into a warm, welcoming bakery. The walls were painted in new colors, the display gained special lighting, and this time the name Sweets of Hope shone proudly on a beautiful sign visible from afar. The grand opening was emotional. Long-time customers, who had known her since the days she sold on the streets, came with tears in their eyes. They said, "We saw your struggle. We know where you came from." Each hug was a reminder that her story wasn't just about business, it was about faith and perseverance. The new shop drew even more attention. Local blogs wrote about her success, highlighting not only the sweets but also her inspiring journey. A regional TV program invited her to share her story, and millions of people came to know her. And yet, despite the public recognition, she stayed grounded. She still stood behind the counter, greeting customers, chatting, offering a genuine smile. She never stopped writing in her manifestation journal, keeping alive the faith that had carried her this far. Yes, the talks and interviews came, but they were only a natural reflection of what she was building. Her focus remained on the sweets, on the team that was growing alongside her, and on the dreams that continued to expand. Many customers said they didn't come only for the flavor, but because they felt part of a story. Stepping into the shop felt like being part of a collective miracle, living proof that pain can indeed be transformed into victory. And so, the woman who once felt invisible was now seen by multitudes. Not just because of the newspapers and interviews, but because she had built something real, something tangible, something that fed not only people's bodies, but also their souls. The expansion of the shop wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It represented the expansion of her life, her faith, her courage. It was living testimony that when the mind opens to new possibilities, the universe responds with generosity. Today, when she looks back, she can hardly believe her own journey. From a woman who once sold sweets on the streets, carrying heavy bags and hidden tears, she became the owner of a thriving business and an example of resilience. Her story isn't only about sweets or money. It's about believing when no one else does. It's about planting faith in the middle of pain and harvesting miracles where once there was only despair. With every sweet prepared, with every customer's smile, she remembers the invisible girl who once felt too small for the world. And she smiles, because she knows she is no longer invisible. Today, she is living proof that pain can be transformed into victory, as long as you choose to believe and take steps of courage. Her days were no longer guided by fear, but by the certainty that thoughts and feelings carry power. The law of attraction wasn't just a nice idea she overheard on a bus. It became the key that unlocked hidden doors, awakening within her the awareness that she could co-create her own reality. And maybe you, listening to this story, are living through something similar. Maybe you feel invisible, afraid, sad, or without direction. But know this, the same power that transformed her life also lives within you. You carry inside the strength to rewrite your own story. Change doesn't happen overnight. It begins with small steps, a word written down, a phrase repeated, a visualization held quietly in your mind. These are seeds which, when watered with faith and perseverance, bloom into real results, just as they did for her. Remember, you are not defined by the doors that closed, nor by the people who doubted you. Your future is shaped by what you choose to believe today. If you decide to plant hope, courage, and faith, the universe will always find a way to respond. Let this woman's story remind you that life can change completely. That even from the deepest pain can rise the most powerful testimony. That invisibility can turn into recognition, and fear can be transformed into confidence. And if this message spoke to your heart, receive it as a calling. Subscribe to the channel to keep receiving stories that strengthen the soul. Write in the comments, "I choose to believe," as an act of faith, and share this video with someone who also needs hope. Because in the end, the greatest lesson of this journey is simple: you don't have to wait for the world to change before you begin. The world starts to change the moment you choose to change within. And that choice, only you can make.